When the Red Army liberated Auschwitz in January 1945, what they found was complete horror. They stumbled across 7,000 prisoners who were clinging on to life in the three main camps. They also found hundreds of prisoners who had passed away. They found horrific evidence of the crimes of the camp, and the inmates told of the deadly nature of Auschwitz. It was the largest site used for mass murder during the Second World War, and over 1.1 million people, it is estimated, died there due to the gas chambers, conditions, executions, and violence inflicted by the SS guards. Rudolf Höss, the commandant who oversaw the camp, established a reign of terror and evil, and following the end of the Second World War, he was even brought back to the camp, which he led, and was executed on a specially built gallows. There was Block 11 of Auschwitz, which was regarded as a brutal torture and punishment centre, in which prisoners were sometimes tortured to death, and also here were standing cells, small oubliette-style cells, where people were crammed into a tiny little prison for days on end. But next door to Block 11 was a death wall, where many executions and shootings took place, but next to it was Block 10, which itself had a horrific reputation for evil and brutality. Join us today as we look at the horrific torture of Block 10 of Auschwitz. Remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. When prisoners were admitted through the gates of Auschwitz, they were often shaved, disinfected, and were then given their striped uniform. They would not have known the horror that would await them within the barbed wire fences. Conditions there were completely terrible and awful, and one female prisoner wrote of the camp that there was one latrine for 30 to 32,000 women, and we were permitted to only use it at certain hours of the day. We stood in line to get into the tiny building, knee-deep in human excrement. As we all suffered from dysentery, we could barely wait until our turn came, and soiled our ragged clothes, which never came off our bodies, thus adding to the horror of our existence by the terrible smell that surrounded us like a cloud. The latrine consisted of a deep ditch with planks thrown across it at certain intervals. We squatted on these planks like birds perched on a telegraph wire, so close that we could not help soiling one another. The conditions there were awful, and executions were carried out in the roll call yard each day, in front of everyone to send a blood-curdling message to the people of the camp not to break the rules. But there was one element of Auschwitz where prisoners were forced to become involved in human experimentation and medical studies run by many of the most evil doctors of the SS and the Nazi Party. It was inside of Block 10, next door to the punishment centre, where the Nazi medical experiments were carried out. Although it was inside of the men's camp, a large amount of experiments were carried out on women. Inside here, a number of evil doctors worked conducting different tests. At Auschwitz, German doctors conducted many different experiments on human test subjects. Heinrich Himmler and other high-ranking members of the SS stated that they wished to use the prisoners of the camp to trial certain medications, and they conducted many sickening experiments. At other camps such as Dachau, doctors were conducting high-altitude tests in which prisoners were forced into high-pressure chambers, then the body was pushed to the limit, and also cold water tests were carried out to see what temperatures the human body could withstand before it gave out. These experiments were very cruel, and the horror continued at Auschwitz, but there was almost one thing that the inmates knew, that if they were selected to take part in medical experiments, it was most probable that they would never make it out of Block 10 alive. SS doctors at Auschwitz tested how to use X-rays as a form of sterilisation device. The Nazis did not want people they deemed undesirable having more children, so they embarked on a huge sterilisation programme, and inside of Auschwitz, many women were forced to be dosed with huge amounts of radiation from the X-rays in attempts to sterilise them and prevent them from having children. One account of this states, experimental subjects, relatively healthy young men and women in their late teens or early 20s, who had been obtained by the previous day's order from the camps, were lined up in the waiting room and brought in one by one, often completely ignorant of what was going to be done to them. Dr. Schumann himself turned on the machine, which hummed loudly. Many of the women emerged with what was known as substantial burns, which could become infected and take a long time to heal. And many quickly developed symptoms of other diseases including fever and severe pain and vomiting. This was incredibly painful, and some evil doctors such as Karl Klauberg went further trying to glue together women's uteruses, which is completely sick. Dr. Klauberg, it was said, injected a substance into the cervix to block the fallopian tubes, and he chose his subjects of women who were married between the ages of 20 and 40 and who had preferably given birth to children. He tried different substances to do this and was very secretive about his work. One of his victims stated, "Dr. Klauberg ordered me to lie down on the gynecological table. Dr. Klauberg used this needle to give me an injection in my womb. I had the feeling that my stomach would burst with the pain. I began to scream so that I could be heard through the whole block." Another set of experiments were funded by Bayer, part of IG Farben, an industrial conglomerate and business, and in these they paid 150 Reichmarks for women inmates from Auschwitz. They were transferred to Bayer's research lab and were used to test an anaesthetic. One employee working on this wrote to the Commandant Rudolf Hirst that the transport of 150 women arrived in good condition. However, we were unable to obtain conclusive results because they died during the experiments. We would kindly request that you send us another group of women to the same number and the same price. Many experiments at Auschwitz took place with the sole intention of studying how the human body would cope with different medications once exposed to a deadly disease. Some prisoners were infected with spotted fever and were then given a vaccine of varying strength to see what happened. Many of these died from the treatment that they did receive. Further prisoners were transferred from Auschwitz to other camps for experimentation. For example, 20 Jewish children were sent to Neuengamme in Hamburg, where they were then injected with a virulent tubercular serum and were then forced into other experiments, and they were later all murdered. At Auschwitz, as conditions got worse and the war turned against the Germans, it was said there was a shortage of animal flesh to be used for bacteria culture, and with this they used human flesh. It was said that, since the SS stole the meat used to produce the culture media, the chief SS physician found it very simple to replace it with human flesh. In Auschwitz, human flesh was more expendable than valuable animal meat. Another doctor of Block 10 was Edward Wirtz, who was concentrated on precancerous growths inside the cervix. He often amputated this part of the body from female prisoners without consent, and was the man who also promoted the angel of death, Josef Mengele. Mengele, the evil doctor, was focused on incredibly shocking experiments, and he carried out most of his work on children away from Block 10, in specially housed barracks, but he also did conduct much of his work inside of Block 10. Bruno Weber was another doctor who injected prisoners with other blood from other blood groups, and many died subsequently from blood poisoning, and he also tested out drugs for mind control. August Hirt was a doctor who was responsible for organising and collecting a Jewish skeleton collection of 86 prisoners. The Nazis were obsessed with genetics, and because of this it was said that prisoners were given a sham physical examination for reassurance, then gassed. The corpses were then immediately transported to the anatomy pavilion of the Strasbourg University Hospital. A French inmate who had to assist the project's director told how preservation began immediately, with the arrival of the bodies that were still warm, their eyes wide open and shining. There were 2 subsequent shipments of men. Inside of Block 10, prisoners, when they knew they were heading for the evil human experimentation department of Auschwitz, knew that there was a very good chance they would never make it out alive. Many prisoners were killed from phenol injections to the heart, so that autopsies could be carried out immediately, and many were also murdered by the experiments they were subject to. This made Block 10 one of the most feared and depraved parts of the largest concentration camp established inside of the Third Reich. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.